Okay, finishing up on the videos. So I'm doing these part 1, part 2 videos this week for some reason. But okay, being old is like your family don't want to put up with you. They put you in an old folks home, and I applied at a few old folks home. You know, not like a CNA or orderly, but just help maintenance. Janitor type of work. It was like they offered me $15 an hour, which I would have taken that in a heartbeat. But they said you're gonna be wiping the older people's private areas. And I was like, I've never done this before. I don't know what I'm doing. But so I said, yeah, of course I can. I need a job. I can do it. Uh, this phone just the brightness turns off, and what it is when you're exactly that. You're when you're old, your brightness kind of turns off, and you're not as witty, you're not as sharp. You're losing your capability of fighting, and that's the same thing a homeless person is going through. You're losing your ability to fight. A lot of people that you called your friends and family done, said adios. We don't want you around. You never stopped learning. You never stopped, caring. You might have not nagged them every day and called them every day, but you got lost in, trying to keep your stuff together. I mean, me, I had a problem of organizing all um, um, my small items, and I'm a minimalist at heart, so I don't have a lot of stuff. I hate hoarding things, 'cause I hate losing things. I don't know if everybody's the same like that, but so when I went in there and put application in, called back, the lady was like, didn't probably realize I was homeless, but at that time I was staying at a sober living house. I just found it because it was cheap rent on Craigslist. It's 500 for a room. I jumped on that because that's what I could afford at the time. I had got the settlement back from a position that I worked at where I hurt my arm, and it wasn't very much money. I could have went through litigation and stayed a little bit longer, but I had waited so long to get anything back. I became homeless, for the second time. And there wasn't, when you do the hotel circuit, it's you know unjustified to pay $100 a night when I wasn't even getting food stamps. I didn't even have any other than my unemployment, and that was just very low rate unemployment. But to get off task here and go back to being old, old people have money, but they're on a fixed income, and they definitely don't want their Social Security being deducted or being taken away. But you know, the partying is just kind of like, what am I doing? And you kind of get into that when you're homeless and you're alone. I mean, I don't know any person that ever stayed by themselves and didn't ever crack a beer open, or sit out on their front porch and just jam out, listen to some music. They got all this free time. If they're really old, they can't drive, but why don't you check on grandma or grandpa? Why don't you go over there? You know, they're retired. They're probably doing some incredibly outgoing kind of things at this point in their life. They have no job, hanging over their head where they got to look and dress a certain way. A lot of these companies don't even want to hire you because you don't have, you know, your clothes ain't clean, but you're gonna dirty them at work. It's like a dishwasher. They won't hire you for a dishwasher position because you're homeless, but you're gonna go to work and get filthy with food and all over your pants. And I used to come home with, you know, from my waist down, just be soaked. I had to wear garbage bags while I wash dishes because, the sprayer would just, kick back and you on you when you're speeding through to get the dishes through the dishwasher. Of course, the little water's gonna get on you when you're in motion. But when you're homeless, it's like you're trying to appeal to somebody, and a family member to hang out with you, but no one wants to hang out with you. And it's like, some people meet being old, and it's kind of like you lose your sense of humor, you lose your sense of being outgoing being old. And I don't know why, or you just kind of quit and you're like, I don't want to deal with these people anymore. It's the same thing when you're about to go homeless. It's like, you start asking for help a little bit, but you're by the fourth person that didn't help you out, you're kind of pissed off. I think by the fourth person that you called when you're old, and maybe you have money, that didn't want to hang out with you, but you have a little bit of money when you're uh except me. I When I very first became homeless, you know I went to jail, and I came out, I was evicted, and I was homeless. Second time I became homeless, I got hurt and had to sue for that one. But, I was still homeless. I got kicked out of a hotel I was staying at for about a year and a half. And, hotels, sorry, Donald, they're not very cheap, you know. And, I have no problem. We need luxury suites and, places to stay, that are better than our resident that place that we're staying at now. So we need hotels. We need top of the line, what it feels to be, treated like if you're rich and you lived in a mansion or something. So we need hotels. There's a need for things. So we're trying, but it feels like when you're old, there's no need for you. So they make a little place for you to hang out with people your age, because you're just so slow. And, that's another thing that could be related to being homeless. That you're so slow, at getting back on your feet that no one wants to hang out with you. Or you got all these other priorities that you're working on, filling out a job, so no one wants to hang out with you. And you're old, you have medication to take, you're not as fast on your feet as you used to, so you're honestly willing, you're better off hanging out with people your own age. At least that they're at your own speed. But you seem like you're always in the way. The homeless people seem like they're always in the way. That's why they go to jail for trespassing. That's what a cop will do, and that makes no sense to me. They'll put the handcuffs on you and say, "Well, they called, and we're gonna have to trespass you, so you're going to jail." And instead of like taking you to a homeless shelter, or knowing uh how easy it is to go call a homeless shelter. But these departments, the government is not all connected. There's not a walkie-talkie or a phone number to go to call a homeless shelter right away, because they don't even answer sometimes. Nowadays, nobody answers the phone. That's why we need kids to answer phones. Give them a little job so they can look good at school and wear name brand stuff. Why are we giving kids everything, and then they have a hard time finding a job when they need it the most? We give them clothes, we give them food, a shelter, everything. I know kids want to do something other than beating themselves up. At least my generation, we love to beat each other up. This not the next generation that's ahead of me. They're kind of maybe 5 or 6 years younger than me. Yeah, they came out a little weak playing video games and stuff like that. But they don't. They're so into video games that they don't want to take care of business. And that just kind of breaks down the cycle of you know what generation is getting weaker and next generation is getting weaker. So how are we gonna stimulate children to incentives, awards? Why don't we start there? We always start with kids anyways. Oh, kids, or doing this. You know, you know what just happened again? There was a mass shooting in school. Donald Trump is so worried about um, getting these immigrants out. He's not staying to education because he has no way to know how to crack it. I got a way to crack education, and I offered my assistance for free to help him out. I got tons of ideas. I'm an idea man. I'm just a minimalist. I don't need everything. I need a good check, but I'm looking for a life myself. I don't want the life I had before because that was a life of failure. I had friends that I didn't trust. I thought I trusted, but they were just coworkers. I worked so hard, I never had a hard time meeting friends. I need a light job, a part-time job right now. That would save me, but there's so many coincidences of being old and being homeless.